Combine the tube screamer with the overdriven amp sound, the delay kicks on, and this is our lead sound. There's the lead sound. Crunch rhythm tone, the tube screamer by itself. And finally the clean sound of the preset. All done with parameter adjustments in footswitch mode. Today I'm dialing in a brand new preset that I'm creating with a bunch of the new blocks that were given to us by Line 6 in the 3.50 update. I've got my small Stomp XL pedal board that I put together not long ago. It's been working out really well. And basically we're going to focus on the PV Vitrol crunch model. We're going to get two distinct sounds out of that using some of the more advanced amp parameters. We're also going to use the Pillars overdrive, which is a tube screamer type design inspired by the Earthquaker device's plumes. I'm also going to use the new Univibe and the new chorus in this preset build. The idea with this whole video is just to kind of walk you through from start to finish and kind of verbally explain my thought process as I design this preset. Some things you should keep in mind along the way. Obviously, for the purpose of this video, I'm using headphones to isolate the guitar from my voice, from the microphone in front of me. And so the sound you're hearing is what I'm designing on the headphones. That's not the finished product. That is not the preset that I'm going to use live. This is a great place to start, but eventually I'm going to have to dial this in on PA speakers, maybe a small FR speaker, and eventually within the context of a live band. So once I've got that all done, I'm going to have a custom tone link in the description where anyone can download this preset for free. So let's get into it. All right, so we're in HX Edit, and I'm just going to move through and kind of rough out the preset. So I'm going to start here by adding the amp block kind of in the middle. And we're going to use the PV Vitrol Crunch with the standard cabinet that it comes with. I'm also going to load up the Dynamic Ambience. I want to focus a little bit on dialing that in today. And then also not the Screamo 808, but the Pillars, which is also a tube screamer. We have those. Maybe let's throw in the new Univibe that they had given us. And then let's do the new chorus, 4-voice chorus, and a delay as well. I might actually want that delay before the chorus. I like the Elephant Man, which is a Memory Man style delay. Just going to make sure we have all these turned off before we start dialing in the amp. First thing I always say to do is to set the input impedance. You can use auto. In certain cases, it'll react a little bit differently depending on like if you have a fuzz at the beginning of the circuit. But I tend to like how it sounds. It's a little bit more consistent when you leave it at one setting or another. So for humbuckery guitars, I usually go with 1 meg. Single coils can be 230 or a particularly bright instrument at 136. It also kind of warms up the general sound a little bit. But for humbucker guitars where you don't want to lose too much brightness, just go with 1 meg in my opinion. Okay, and we're going to move into dialing in this amp first thing. The way I'm going to structure this preset is that, well, essentially I'm on my HX Stomp XL here, and what I want to do is set it up so that I have a total of 4 different gain stages. Okay, we're going to have an amp parameter adjustment assigned to footswitch D, which is footswitch 3 on the Stomp XL. And then we're going to have the bypass function, although there's going to be some other cool tricks I'm going to share in a second, on the tube screamer. I'm also going to have, I tend to like my modulation that's pre-distortion on a footswitch earlier, left to right speaking on the unit. I'm going to have a parameter here, I think on footswitch 5, parameter adjustments in the reverb block for an alternate sound, and I'll probably have the chorus on this. I am missing the delay block. There's a cool thing. Of course, I could just assign it to footswitch 6, but for the people that have the original Stomp, there's a really cool trick on how we can access this without using up a footswitch for it. It's not the one I shared in the tip video about a month ago. There's actually another cool way, and yeah, we'll get there in a second. So let's start with the amp model. What I want to do first is just kind of dial in a clean sound. I'm going to take a screenshot of it. I'm going to dial in my crunch rhythm distorted sound, take a screenshot of that, and then make sure all my adjustments are accounted for in this the parameter, the controller assign screen. So something cool to experiment with is how the pre-gain and the post-gain interact. So what's cool about this amp is that you actually have two gain stages that are in series. They cascade into each other. The amp sounds entirely different depending on if you're using primarily pre-gain or post-gain. For this sound, I think I'm going to err on a little bit more post-gain. It's not going to be a totally clean sound. I'm using clean in this context, in the context of this preset. Something like this is what I would call a clean sound. And we'll kind of get this roughed in, but one of the first things I always like to do is mess around with the cabinet block. So once I get the amp EQ dialed in, I like to go mess around a little bit in the cab block. This sounds a little bit too warm for me. I'm gonna try a brighter mic. The 414 is usually a pretty good pick for that. The 609, the Sennheiser, or the 906 model rather. That's a pretty bright mic too. 421. That is a model of the Sennheiser 421, the MD 421, which is a famous mic to be used on toms. It also has a lot of that kind of like crisp high-end sizzle that helps the amp cut through. So if you're working with an amp model that sounds a little bit on the darker side, a 421, a 906, or maybe the 414 model microphones, those would be great choices to try out. I'm going to kind of skim through this next part. This could be its own video, truthfully. I actually did a video using a real guitar amp, that Mesa Boogie behind me. And if you want to dig into that, it's only about 10 minutes or so. It kind of walks you through the basics of miking a guitar amp, how the placement relative, proximity to the speaker, left and right placement, and then also the angle of the mic affects the sound in 3 different ways. So go check that out. I'll leave a link up there or in the description if I remember. And yeah, I will address this specifically with its own video, though, at a later point, probably in a week or 2. I tend to, like I mentioned, like to go for where the dust cap meets the speaker cone, just very generally speaking. The center of the speaker has a very punchy sound to it. As you kind of move towards this placement that I like, it adds a little bit of high end. To me, it gets just a little bit more clear. That's kind of why that's my default position. And as you go towards the end, you're going to lose a lot of high end. So we'll put that back right there. The distance, the proximity of the microphone to the speaker really affects the low end mostly. The closer you get, especially with the directional microphone, the more fake low end there is added. So let's start at the minimum distance here, and we'll back up. Honestly, that's a little far back, but that has a really cool sound. I'm going to go with this setting, though. This is a little bit more generic. And lastly, the angle is kind of a way to shave off the low end as well. Kind of helps clear up that low end rumble. I'm going to leave it directly on, though, and compensate with a low cut. Something I want to try with this model is dialing up the depth control and then compensating with a low cut. So we're going to go a little bit aggressive here. A little bit higher than I would normally, and then come down with a high cut. That's usually my default setting. So we'll stick with this for the cabinet setting. Now we're going to more closely refine the equalizer in the amp, the bass in the middle, and the treble, the presence, and also the depth controls. presence really helps add some clarity. So there's the settings. I'm going to stick with that. The sag, ripple, hum, bias, and bias X controls all kind of affect the quality of the overdrive that you're getting. There's a little bit of crunch here, even in the clean sound. So I'm going to work on that a little bit. Kind of a generic rule of thumb here is that a lower sag setting equates to a tighter, more modern sound, where a higher sag setting has a little bit more distortion in the power tube section. It sounds a little bit more flubby, more vintagey. If you can think of like the Lagrange ZZ Top guitar tone, I always think about that when I'm adjusting the sag parameter. So this is the clean sound, and this is what I think I'm going to stick with. Something that we haven't really done yet before I take a screenshot is kind of get the level set for this preset. So something I always do when I'm building presets is I want to try and level match the unit bypassed. And if you didn't know, you can actually press these two buttons next to the screen and it'll bypass the unit. What I like to do is try and match the sound of the preset with the preset as if it, there's nothing engaged. Your channel volume control, by the way, is the completely flat response. It's not changing the sound, it's just controlling the volume, whereas the master volume parameter here actually does affect how the power tube section of the amp model works. I should also note, as we're talking about leveling briefly here, that distorted guitar sounds just naturally kind of trick our ears into making us think that they're louder than they actually are because they're compressed and it's a sustaining sound. There's not as much peak information as a clean sound would be. And so I typically discover this every time I build a preset. It's easy to do on headphones or studio monitors, and then I want to refine it here on an FR speaker. I have a PA tower that I use, and then I'll eventually take it and try it out with a band. But the thing I'm consistently not able to get right when I design presets is the volume matching between a clean and various overdriven sounds. It's something I haven't gotten really good at. You kind of need to compare it in context to a band. So let's go with this. They sound pretty close. Cool. So this is going to be our clean sound. I'm going to take a screenshot of it so I can reference this later. And what I'm going to do now, first off, I should save it, by the way. I always like to categorize all my presets. So my electric guitar presets that are designed for a guitar with a humbucker are labeled as such, and we'll just call it PV Vitrol. Cool. So now I'm going to take the amp model and I'm going to dial in a slightly more crunchy sound. Okay, so here's a sound I like. Now I'm going to take a screenshot of this, line them up back to back, and reference it as I dial in the parameter adjustments here. So if you're new to this channel, something that I tend to like to do when I set up Helix, especially with the smaller Helix devices, is I tend to prefer footswitch mode instead of snapshots. And that's just for the simple reason that you can get more combinations of sounds per preset in footswitch mode than you can with snapshots. So I'm just going to start this off. I'm going to assign this, I think, to footswitch 3, actually. So my overdrive is typically footswitch 3. If I have a secondary overdrive channel or a sound, I'll put it on footswitch 2. The modulation is usually going prior to that on like footswitch 1. And then I have wet effects on 4 and 5. On the XL, I also usually do like a boost on 6. And yeah, I have an extra footswitch 7 all the way over on the side next to that, if you can kind of see it. But that's just kind of how I'm going to lay this out. I'm going to turn off snapshot control and just go back and forth. Our clean sound is going to be the minimum value, so 1.7 for pre-gain and 5.0 for post-gain in this case. And I'm just going to do this with every single parameter that I'm able to that I've made an adjustment between these two sounds. The thing you should know as you do this is that you have a maximum of 8 parameters per foot switch, so there's a slight limitation compared to snapshot mode. But this is, most of the time, it's, I'm able to accomplish what I want. So I'm just going to fast forward through this part. It's going to take a second. All right, so I've got 8 total parameters that I've found out that I've made adjustments to. I have 7.3 for minimum for channel volume and 4.6. We'll find out if that was close enough as I test volumes back and forth. Let's see if that was right. Okay, so here is the clean sound. And here's the crunch tone. So that channel volume is going to have to change a lot. Again, the maximum value is the sound with the foot switch engaged. Whatever you decide to make that. I bet you that's close. As I said, distorted sounds are typically appear louder than they actually are. So again, I'm on the clean amp settings as I dial in the overdrive in the pillars, which is a tube screamer. Cool, so there's my sound. That's all I need to do here is just assign the bypass function of that overdrive. We'll call it tube screamer. I like going with generic names when I make presets, and we'll assign that manually to a light orange color because we're going to do some parameter adjustments here too. So there's our overdriven sound. I should lower the level a lot on this. So let me explain the gain stages that I have so far. I have the clean sound. I have the overdriven sound with the amp distortion. Turn that off, go back to the clean platform, and I have the overdrive just from the tube screamer. So right off the bat, I have a much brighter sound with the tube screamer and kind of a darker rhythm, chunky tone with the amp drive. Okay, so what I want to do now is create an option here where I'm using both of these together. It's a little more distorted than I would like, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to assign on footswitch 3 here a parameter adjustment that affects the tube screamer model. As I mentioned earlier, we're going to have to get rid of one of these parameter adjustments, so I decided that the mid control, it was moving a little bit, but I could live without that. I just found a middle ground and set it there and then removed the parameter adjustment, so that's not changing anymore based, for the different amp sounds. What I'm going to do now is set up a parameter adjustment on the tone control from the tube screamer, but I'm going to assign it to footswitch 3 along with all these other amp controls. Let's go from minimum setting of 5.0, which is where it's at right now, I think. And we'll go up to 7.5, a round number. Snapshot control off. And yeah, so just to reiterate what I had said earlier is basically we have the clean sound, the overdriven sound, the tube screamer sound. And as I toggle the overdriven sound, you can see that the tone control in the amp on the tube screamer is moving, but it's obviously not doing anything because it's bypassed. We'll use this similar technique with the delay in a second here. Cool, so we have now our combination of the overdriven amp with the tube screamer. It's going to naturally have a little bit of a volume increase, but that's okay because that's our lead sound. So there's the basic dry sounds of the preset. I'm going to hit save again so I don't lose this. Brief interruption. I wanted to mention if you're digging this preset build and you want to try some of my other presets, I do have a few free bundles on my website. Link in the description. Let's talk about dialing in the ambience block, the Dynamic Ambience. This is one of the coolest things they've added to the Helix, truthfully. So one of the common complaints with modelers in general, not just the Helix, is that they kind of lack the in-the-amp room feel that a live guitar amp does. And truthfully, a lot of that, it doesn't have to do with digital modeling at all. It has to do with the fact of how we're monitoring the sound of the amp ourselves. Of course, the amp models are captured through a microphone, so it's not like you're hearing an amp in a room. You're hearing the amp through a close microphone. So not just that, but also the fact that when we're monitoring this, typically we're on studio monitors or headphones, and we're not really getting as many of the reflections around the room as we would be if there was a guitar amp sitting next to you. So think about this for a second. The sound of a speaker from a guitar amp comes out, and of course it reaches your ears. You hear directly from the speaker, but the sound also comes out the back of the amplifier, and we hear that reflection. Not just that, but the sound of the amp also bounces off the walls, the floors, the ceilings. We might hear an initial reflection off the door to your left. We might also hear that reflection hit the door, hit the wall, and then come back to the other side. So what this Dynamic Ambience block is meant to do is to kind of simulate that. So we're going to go for two distinct reverb sounds here with the parameter adjustment, and I'm going to assign it to Footswitch 5, just like I mentioned. That one's Footswitch 5 on the Stomp XL. And yeah, what we're going to be going for is just kind of an ambient sound, a room sound, a little bit of an echo to it, and then a much more dramatic reverb sound is, what you would expect a reverb pedal for a guitar amp to do. So we're going to start here with the room size. For the kind of generic room sound, let's stick with the smaller room, so 8 meters, and I'm going to bump up this pre-delay just a little bit. The damping control is a very gentle way of affecting the high end. So if you could keep that basically completely off, you might notice there's a bit of a bathroom tile floor effect, Don't be afraid to push the mix control up a little bit so you can really hear what you're working with. That damping control is here to kind of attenuate the high end of it. The room still sounds very resonant, but it doesn't have that pingy bathroom sound. The diffusion is a control that affects the reflections and how many reflections we hear. Think about this as, does the room have carpet or does it have hard floors? Are there hard glass windows or is it like plaster walls, which are a little bit softer? A lower setting of diffusion is going to be less reflections. A higher setting is going to be more reflections. The sound bounces around more. So for just kind of a basic room tone, I'm going to leave that low. The shape is interesting. We can actually control the balance of the early reflections versus the late reflections that we hear. So for a generic room sound, I'm probably going to go with early reflections. Then we have the low cut and the high cut that we've always had. Cool. So again, I'm going to take a screenshot of this. That's going to be my initial tone, and we're going to start dialing in a secondary tone for a reverb. So I'm going to select a larger room. It's going to change the algorithm, so the transition as you go between the two sounds is not going to be that clear. But, you know, in the grand scheme of things, that's not a huge deal. I'm going to bump up the pre-delay a little bit. Since it's already a bigger room, it's going to take longer to hear that first echo. Let's maybe drop the damping control a little bit. On more dramatic reverb sounds, I tend to like less high end. It's a bigger room, so there's probably going to be a little bit more reflections. I'm going to bring up the diffusion, and I want to hear more of the later reflections. You'll notice this reverb block does not have a decay control on it. Instead, we have a room size, and we have the shape control, which lets us choose if we're hearing mostly the early or the late reflections. We also have the diffusion control, which affects a similar thing. So yeah, this is just kind of a quick guide to dialing this in. And let's figure out the mix setting. I haven't figured it out for the first sound yet, but definitely want a little bit more than that. Cool, let's go with that. If you're hearing a high-pitched ringing, that's actually just the strings on this side. I should get something to dampen that. So we've got our two sounds now, and we're going to work on setting up a parameter adjustment to flip back and forth. So the minimum setting is going to be the room ambience, the room reflections, and the maximum setting is going to be the more like actual, you know, normal, typical reverb sound that we're kind of expecting when we hear the word reverb. I'm going to fast forward through this again. And lastly, I need to figure out a mix control. So I know for the heavier reverb sound, I'm going to have a mix control set at 37. And I think the minimum setting, actually, this might be a case where the minimum setting is higher. So let's check out this sound. That's too high for sure. Could use maybe even just a little bit less. Cool, so there we go. Again, we have our, just kind of, this is our stock sound. This is the always on reverb. Still pretty dry, but helps to give the amp sound a little bit of depth. And then we have the longer reverb. All right, so we've got the overdrive sound, the amp tone, and the reverb dialed in. Let's do the new Flexivibe. I'm just going to assign this to footswitch 1. It's pretty simple. And then we're going to have our bypass function there. There's not really too much you need to do here. Most of these effects come pre-dialed in with just a very generic sound of what you would expect from that style of effect. So here's a Univibe. That warp knob is shifting the symmetry of the sound of the waveform. You can hear a little bit more of the vibrato warble effect if you drive the mix higher. So I'm going to go with that for my Univibe sound, and we already have that on footswitch 1, so we're good with that. Next up, I'm going to pull up some settings on the 4-voice chorus, and I'm just going to assign that to footswitch 4 right away, since that one's available. And as I might have mentioned in a previous video, I just like going for like generic sounds because I use a ton of different presets. So if I just see chorus, I know what that sound is going to be. If it has a very specific chorus sound, I might name it something different, but generally I just say chorus or delay. Time-based delay, solo delay, stuff like that. So with chorus, I tend to prefer higher depth, lower rate. This voices control is pretty cool. So basically you have a few different copies of your signal going and being modulated at different times, so it just gives it a much wider sound. seems like instead of a high cut, we actually have a high shelf. So this is going to be a less dramatic effect. We can't select the frequency that the high shelf works, but we can control it more gradually. Whereas a high cut is saying nothing above 10K, for example, is getting through. A shelf is saying, okay, we'll let 10K through, but maybe just a little bit less, a few decibels down. Cool, that's good, and we have it assigned to footswitch 4. Cool, so we have the basic preset finished. What I'm going to do now is figure out what to do with this delay block. As I said, I want to design this so that the people that are on the original Stomp are not missing anything. So, I could use footswitch 6. That's easy enough. It's right there on the Stomp XL. But for the people with the smaller units, let's use the delay. Let's find a way to use it without using another foot switch. So, as I said earlier, footswitches 2 and 3, when they're pressed together, that's our like lead sound. It's a little bit higher in volume, and this is going to be a point that we can also use the delay. So what's happening with the delay is that we want it on only when both of these switches are pressed. So to achieve this, we're going to assign the bypass of the delay block to one of these foot switches, and we're going to assign the mix parameter from 0 to whatever we decide to set it at, 25% maybe, on the other foot switch. And what this is going to do is essentially mean that, as the amp overdrive is on, the delay might be turned on, but the mix is down, and vice versa. If the amp is on the clean setting, but we're using the tube screamer, the mix is up on the delay block, but it's bypassed, so you're not hearing it. When we combine them finally, then you're actually hearing the delay not being bypassed and with the mix high enough that you can hear it. So that's how we're achieving this basically. We are going to have to free up one more foot switch here. This is not something I do all the time, but I did want to show it off in this video. So let's pick one of these parameters that's not moving much. I'm pretty married to the bias setting, actually. That's not, in this amp, it tends to make a huge effect. So I'm actually going to get rid of the bass control. In the clean sound, we have 6.6, and the overdriven sound, we have 5.7. So let's split the difference a little bit. We'll go 6.3, and I'm just going to delete that. Now we have one foot switch assignment freed up. Let's assign this to the delay, and we'll do the bypass. Now click on the delay again, and we're going to set the mix parameter to footswitch 2 to be aligned with the tube screamer. Make sure that they're working at the same time. So our minimum setting on the delay, see, they're backwards. So what I do is I just manually turn that on and then press the switch again. Now, as the tube screamer is off, the mix is at the minimum setting. So minimum is going to stay 0. Maximum might be like 28% or something. And we're not going to change any of the labeling here. So now what I want to do is dial in the actual settings for the delay tone. A solo delay, in my opinion, tends to be between like 300 and 500 milliseconds. If you can think of Steve Vai's sound, he always has that real long delay behind him, 2 or 3 repeats. Some modulation on the sound, which is why I like the Elephant Man model, a copy of the Memory Man. Some modulation helps it kind of blend into the background, gives you the depth without sticking out too much, and that's actually what you want in a solo delay sound too. Cool, so that's the sound, and I might actually bring back the mix a little bit. So let's run through all the different foot switch combinations, and I'm going to give this a save before we go any further. So the preset's basically finished. What I'm going to do now is just play through the foot switches for you so you can hear how they all interact and work together. So again, here's that clean sound. We'll turn on the Univibe. Let's go with chorus and reverb. I always like chorus at the end of the chain because I like hearing the reverb slightly modulated and the delays and stuff too. Let's check out the sound from the overdrive and the tube screamer. Nice and focused mid-forward sound. Here's the distorted amp without the tube screamer now. And this is kind of designed to be your, like your crunch rhythm tone. And then we can combine the tube screamer with the overdriven amp sound. The delay kicks on, and this is our lead sound. There's the lead sound. Crunch rhythm tone, the tube screamer by itself. And finally the clean sound of the preset. All done with parameter adjustments in footswitch mode. And of course the best part about this is that we still have all of these effects, delay, reverb, and stuff that we can throw on all together if we wanted to. So yeah, there is the preset for you. Let me know if you have any questions on this preset build. Leave me a comment down below. I'm usually pretty good at getting back to people. Maybe it's something that I just skimmed over too quickly. Again, this preset is going to be available at the custom tone link in the description for free. The version that you're going to download is a little bit more refined than what we heard. Again, remember, I was just dialing in on my headphones. I'm going to take this to a PA tower that I have in my basement. I'm going to bring it up here and refine the tone a little bit more. I'm also going to take it to an actual PA system at a venue that I'm at every week, and then actually use it with a live band before I upload it to custom tone. So you can be sure basically that this preset has been dialed in for use with a live band, as all my presets are. You can check out the free ones at the link in the description. I also have what I call the complete preset bundle. What is a complete preset? This is one that's designed on the smaller Stomp units to really make the most out of the limited design. These are presets complete that are intended to serve as your entire rig. They've got amp modeling, cabinet modeling, they've got different overdrive tones, modulation, reverb, delay, essentially everything you need in a typical guitar rig. And there's a ton of stuff for humbucker equipped guitars, single coil equipped guitars, acoustic instruments. I've got a bunch of IR packages that I've put together. Basically, I've captured my mandolin, my acoustic guitar, my classical guitar, and a ukulele as well. They're all available as IRs in that bundle. I've also captured this Mesa Boogie that you're looking at right now. It's got a Celestion G12 Vintage 30 speaker. It sounds great, and I'm using that in a few of the presets that are available in that bundle. So you also get a link to download that IR bundle if you want to purchase it. This preset library is good for all future updates, so every time Line 6 puts out an update, I usually put a few more presets in it, or if there's something I feel is lacking, or if someone wants has a specific request and I want to accommodate that, then I'll just throw that in the bundle. Of course, it's available to anyone who has purchased it in the past for free. So take a look at that if you're interested. Again, thanks for watching the video. Take care, and I'll see you in the next one.